someone with little tiny lungs like me. So, I'm Mark Brown. I do stuff around mental health, do stuff around digital. I've been asked to speak to you today in an effort to answer the question, what will it take to get digital tools into regular use in mental health services, and what could researchers do to help make that work? You will be happy to know that there's a really simple answer to this that took me ages to come up with. And the answer is make digital tools for mental health that work, and then make sure that they get to people who would benefit from them. Job done, easy peasy, ish bosh. But of course, it's not as simple as that. What makes a mental health tool work is a surprisingly vexed question. What makes a mental health system actually be a mental health system isn't as simple to define as you would think. The concept of people who might benefit from digital tools in mental health is more murky than you might imagine. To put my cards on the table early on, I should state my position. I believe deeply in the potential for digital technology to help make people's lives better. I'm also deeply disturbed by the power being bestowed upon a new form of techno-feudal system where cleverness is taken as evidence of goodness and where real changes are made to people's real lives without their permission or even their knowledge by people who are less grounded in an understanding of ethics and public good than your average UK secondary school child. I am worried that digital technology has the potential to become the underpinnings of a new Enclosures Act, where what were once common goods or common grounds are transferred to the perpetual ownership of a small number of very rich techno-bergs. I'm also, at the same time, hopeful that the digital future involves choices, not inevitabilities, and that we can make a future where technology helps people to have better mental health. I believe in good technology, but the question for all of us, researchers included, is what makes good technology? An atom bomb or an autonomous battlefield robot or a functional facial recognition system with a low level of false positives and negatives is an amazing technical achievement, but I don't think that necessarily makes any of those things good. In technology related to health, it's entirely possible to make a product that everyone loves, everyone who pays for it thinks is value for money, but which also makes life worse for people not using it. We're not in any position to oppose a digital future in mental health, but it's our job to make sure that that future isn't a really terrible one. The worst possible future is the one we're living in now, the one where people who need help with their mental health can't get the things they want and need to help them to live the life they want to lead. For over a decade now, digital mental health has been promised as the future, and was being promised as the future way back when now was the future. We're not there yet, so it's up to us to take action now to bend the arc of events as it stretches out into future decades. When it comes to getting digital tools into regular use in mental health services, they already are for some people in some places. Services like Big White Wall, Couth, Silver Cloud, Beating the Blues, Oxford VR's Game Change Immersive VR are currently in use in places in the UK. They're in use because commissioners looked at outcomes and value for money and balanced them against budgets and capacity and possibility for implementation. They're there because someone bought them in. The companies are there and still in the game, often through a mixture of private, charitable and public investment. Some of the providers of these digital solutions to the NHS are spin-outs from academic or health organisations, some are private companies. To a great extent, the drivers to date for digital mental health within the UK have been internal ones, whether internal to a particular trust or CCG, internal to the health service itself, or internal in the sense that policy has decreed that digital mental health should happen. One of the holy grails at this level has been to broaden effective treatment of mental illness, distress or trauma without the requirement to greatly increase spending on bricks and mortar and flesh and blood infrastructure. If we can find effective digital tools and services, then we can do more of what we need to do for less, is the argument. Our current Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Matt Hancock, is an enthusiast for this great grail quest. As well he might be, as he's the first Health Secretary the UK has ever had who was also an app before he took up his office. The challenges of this approach are numerous. Frontline health workers are very suspicious of top-down technology. It changes their working life, challenges their sense of the boundaries and clarities of their profession, and it often doesn't feel like it belongs to them. It's something they interface well, something sold to them as a done deal, something they don't feel like they can really alter in practice once it's implemented. In a big top-down digital rollout, there are three possible states of acceptance from staff. There's full acceptance, there's cheeky workarounds, and there's full rejection. There's just three. In health terms, we talk about how digital tools need to be better implemented by services, and what we really mean is how they should be better integrated and accepted into daily practice. Both members of the public and staff are often worried that a digital tool means shunting something important away into a digital siding, like a kind of take 3 of these and call me in the morning if things get worse approach. Effective integration requires work far beyond the point where the shiny digital thing arrives. It requires to spend time with staff at all levels to explore and understand how, when, and why, and where this new thing will interface with them and what they already do. At present, digital tools and mental health are held in a kind of paradox. If they're powerful enough in that they have a measurable effective element, they are practice changing enough to really change how treatment might be delivered, and as such, they are most likely to present a perceived threat to existing structures. They become a kind of new specialism to be integrated into a team or service, and as such, they're most likely to face resistance. In contrast, those considered to be a nice add-on, which may or may not change anything, but are easier to run in parallel with what you're already doing, but are also unlikely to be fully integrated because they're considered to be more in the realm of stuff we might tell our service users about, like going for a walk or joining a gym. They may and may not be promoted or recommended by staff, and they won't necessarily be considered core to the treatment or support they provide. Culture exists in healthcare. Without changing how staff view digital tools, they will always be considered marginal or someone else's job. One of the challenges for something like the NHS Apps Library was that while it was possible to develop a way of assessing the ways in which an app could cause harm to potential users, it was much harder to assess what good an app might do to those users. Greater claims need far greater evidence, so apps with greater potential to actually affect someone's health or well-being are far harder to recommend than apps that do something less intense, but which also runs far lower risk of causing harm. Hence the proliferation of apps that teach techniques validating with mediums of delivery and things like mood diaries, which are just basically digital bits of paper, really. To solve this, what we need is better research. Today, external pressure to provide digital services has been slim, and where it does exist, it relates more to users of services hoping digital tools can be used in a way that makes existing services function better. Many of these demands have been around the use of digital tools to provide better communication, better out-of-hours care, and easier booking and tracking of treatment. A meaningful digital tool to many who use services at the moment might be a secure way of texting or emailing services that guarantees a response, or of adding to or amending existing records of correspondence, or of accessing something like anonymous chat, counselling or support without recourse to waiting for Monday morning to come around. The language of do more for less infects nearly all discussions of digital tools and mental health, and the people that it lands with hardest are the people most worried about getting the care and support that they need. If you really want therapy and someone to talk to, do more for less digital sounds very much like you'll be getting less of what you need. It's another example of disempowerment and feeling like the future is being done to you, not with you, or on your behalf. People are aware of cuts to public services, they've lived through them, they'll have lost friends during the duration of this never-ending austerity. Firing a shiny service at them as if from a cannon, saying we bought this for you as it hits them in the chest, won't make them feel better. The work of beginning early with the idea of digital as a vital integrated part of the whole service doesn't just apply to staff, it applies to users as well. Co-production and co-design can provide a way out of this impasse, where both communities work together to build new tech, but this runs into the problem that Doctors Who Code type movements run into, in that it's really hard to build good tech that has a big potential to change people's lives. It requires specialisms as well as good intentions. Often the debate and the pressure for digital services comes from early adopters. According to GP Online, the online GP consultation app GP at Hand has, in 2 years since the video consultation service was given the green light to begin registering patients outside its South West London area, where its host practice is based, it has added more than 63,500 patients to its list. 9 out of 10 of these patients who signed up since November 2017 are aged between 20 and 39 years old, and this group makes up 86% of the practice's total patient list, leading to accusations of cherry picking, which GP at Hand denies. In general, in the world, it's the healthy, white, affluent tech bros and wannabe tech bros that define what gets built and for whom. I listened to a session in Utrecht last week by Tobias Gantner, a German doctor and founder of Healthcare Futurists who runs hackathons. He was talking about one of the vital elements of their work being getting people excited about the possibilities of technology. To that end, they've been involved in setting up a mobile health tech expo, which is basically like a group of exciting looking tents and sitting areas that you can set up in a shopping centre or a car park or any other public space where people can come and play with new technology, watch videos and have conversations. The idea was to give people a chance to touch the possible future at scale. In mental health, such a cool roadshow illustrating what we could make happen with digital technology and explaining its implications, limitations and possibilities could help to remove the mystery, fear and system speak from digital mental health tech and show people who have the largest stake in mental health care, which is the people who bloody well need mental health care, what could be possible if we had the will to make it happen. So, what's the role of researchers in helping this digital tech we want to happen in mental health? Again, I've got a simple answer. Do better research. And to do that, I suggest requires a little bit of rethinking of what researching digital tools means. One of the major challenges in both understanding and researching mental health apps is the difficulty in escaping from the mental shapes or understandings of a problem or a task forced upon us. We are challenged by our essential conservatism in conceptual understanding of what digital interventions might do or be. We're trapped in the land of the skeuomorph, a land where an object or feature imitates the design of a familiar and similar artifact made from another material. When we're looking at digital tools in mental health, we are often looking to design things that retain the shape of another treatment, service or interaction. When we wish to study a digital tool or service, we treat it as if it were directly comparable to another non-digital tool. Neither captures what digital might do. A digital tool is more complex than that, and so must our research be. We make a mistake thinking that because a digital tool exists for a medical purpose, our only role is to evaluate its clinical efficacy by deploying it as if it were a medicine or therapy. I've seen far too many research papers that barely describe what the digital intervention they are evaluating actually is. The app or intervention is described only in terms of what it does or the device that it's on. That's not good enough. Modern digital design includes far more disciplines than just a person in a room writing code. It draws on psychology, art, ethnography, statistics, linguistics, deployment studies, business medicine, physical engineering, health science, politics, economics, law. The physical and code elements of a digital tool create an almost infinite range of possible objects and functions. Researching the digital tools needs to combine a similar array of research and interrogatory skills. In mental health digital research, we, to the best of my knowledge, don't yet have many, or indeed any, taxonomies to identify, classify and group different forms of digital interactions. Is a pull to refresh the same as a click to refresh? I think we all know that it isn't. One is addictive, the other probably less so. Is using a touchscreen to tick a box a different experience from typing yes? These are the kind of little granular things that actually matter in digital tools. I'm picturing something as beautiful and vibrant as magical as those Victorian sketchbooks filled with sketches of corals and flower stamens and fish gills. I'm picturing something as detailed as the system for classifying folk stories. I'm picturing researchers getting out there and classifying apps and services in the wild like they were playing Pokemon Go. Until we have a research language as detailed as the language of design, we are just testing washing machines for Which magazine rather than contributing to the wider growth of human health. Research needs to tell us what to build next, as well as telling us what to use now. Researching the digital tools needs to bring together the same mix of skills and disciplines that go into making digital tools. Why is this important? The combination of interactions and processes and digital decisions in a digital intervention are the same as the chemical makeup of a medicine. We wouldn't trial a new sedative and describe it in our paper as the blue one. But I read too many digital papers and press releases and formulating articles that leave out details like this when it comes to digital. If we don't want digital to become an increasingly privatised, intellectual property-defined walled garden of knowledge, we have to make sure that research isn't just useful to health service decision makers, but also to people who actually want to build and design tools and make them better. The arrival of ubiquitous, always-on digital devices with constant connectivity and a range of sensors has created conditions where digital tools are less something that happens on a screen and more a complex, singular event, where someone is, what they're doing beforehand, what they did afterwards, what they're doing during, what device they're using, what their expectations are. All of these have a bearing on what a digital tool does for and to someone. With digital tools that are used in people's lives rather than controlled conditions, our research is like a lab test of a medication rather than a field test. We're asking, did this work in the artificial way we trialled it, rather than in the real-world conditions in which it's actually intended to be used? I love David C. Moore's work, exploring the use of micro-randomized control trials, ecological momentary assessments, and the use of sensor and interaction data to understand more fully what's going on when someone is actually interacting with an app. With digital, we have the capacity and the obligation to understand how different users differ from each other, rather than just how they as a group differ from our control or comparison group. We need to know what happens when someone uses a digital tool, not just how they measure up on our proxy for effectiveness. And beyond that, we must stop surrendering the ground of defining what and who is considered valuable to companies that are business models that are antithetical to the delivery of universal healthcare services. The business model for GP at hand isn't the same as the business model of a regular GP practice. One wants maximum sign-ups, the other wants to improve the health of the entire community that it serves. This doesn't mean that GP at hand isn't a great service taken on its own merits, but there are broader questions to be asked and to be answered about how it fits in with the broader goals and aspirations of a national health service. We need to study digital tools as events in services and understand what their implications are for those services, and we need to study them as events in human communities too. Who and how something is funded matters in evaluating its value to those who need it. The role of publicly funded research into digital tools for mental health should be to maximise the public good that digital tools create. Not all benign interventions come free of malign consequences. The best possible future is one where we have a range of digital tools and innovations that can be provided at a cost to individuals and communities which we can collectively afford, a future where we know who is most likely to benefit from using a particular digital tool or intervention, one where the development of and the profit from these digital tools does not amount to nationalising the risk of creating them, while the profit from their implementation is privatised, and one where progress, development and new knowledge can be built upon rather than dying when an app, tool or service or company dies. It might sound like I'm being scathing both towards developers of digital tools and towards those who research them, and to an extent, if I'm honest, I am being scathing. But that's because I can see a future where the people I really care about still don't get the future they deserve, and that's where you lot come in. So, thank you. I'm on a live mic, so this is where I go for a week.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks ever so much. That's a challenge, isn't it, for all of us to start thinking about for the rest of the day and to carry on. If you have questions, thoughts, reflections on that, hold on to them for just a little bit longer for the last bit before lunch, which is our first panel discussion. So we'd like to invite Mark and Andrew to come back and be on that panel, but also Lucia Valmaggia and Dan Robotham to come and join us. So if I could ask you four to come and join the panel now, if that's okay. So how this is going to work is after lunch we move on to thinking a lot about implementation and how we make digital tools happen and available in mental health services. But our focus this morning still is very much on the research. And the question for this panel is, what are the next steps in researching digital tools for mental health settings? So the way we're going to work this, I think, is to, I'll introduce each panel member in a minute, and they've got a couple of minutes to respond to a question, which hopefully will just add to what we've heard already. And then it's your turn, really, to sort of ask questions to the panel, give reflections and comments, and hear what people have got to say. So that's the plan until the break for lunch at 1. So first of all, could I welcome back Andrew Gumley, who we're really pleased to have with us today from Glasgow. So in addition to being the lead of the Empower study, Andrew is Professor of Psychological Therapy at the University of Glasgow and leads the psychosis research group there. And Andrew, the question we've given you was, given the findings from your Empower study and the ARES study, is the best way forward now a big trial on digital self-management, or are there other approaches, perhaps as Mark was suggesting, that could be preferable?
Yeah, thank you very much, Bryn, for the question. I guess both areas in power have been set up as trials that were designed very much to work out the feasibility and acceptability of an intervention for a larger scale trial, and they were, thank you very much, and they were designed for that purpose. This is quite weird, this way. I think one of the things that question made me think of is being very clear about what's the problem that you're trying to solve. Where does digital fit into that problem, and how does digital link into the particular outcomes that you're interested in and the particular mechanisms that lie behind those outcomes? So I think it's all too easy to think about, in the world of digital, we'll throw digital as a solution to problems, and of course the danger is that you're kind of using digital for the sake of using digital. So I think having good, thoughtful theory about where digital and the kinds of digital taxonomies that might be relevant to particular problems. So we have, there's a range of technologies we can think of: virtual reality, there's online web-based interventions, and also smartphone-based interventions. In relation to Empower, I guess smartphones had an advantage for us because they provided real-time data. And real-time data isn't something that's available routinely in services. And for me, that's part of the problem, that often decision-making, important decisions are made in services with minimal information, often with very strong anchoring biases behind that information. So decisions whether or not to admit a person or to use the Mental Health Act are often made, maybe on a Friday afternoon with somebody who's unwilling to communicate, who may have very good reasons to be unwilling to communicate because of the consequences of that previously. So digital smartphones provide an opportunity for real-time data, but the challenge is then, how do you then make those real-time data available to inform meaningful discussions? And who are those meaningful discussions with, and what are the purposes of those meaningful discussions is also another important part of that. So I think you have to think about what the ecosystem is. So my short answer is, yes, let's do more big trials, but also let's think carefully about what's the ecosystem for those trials, and who are the stakeholders, and how do we involve all of those stakeholders.
Thank you very much. Our second panel member at the other end is Dan Robotham, who's the Deputy Research Director of the Bryn Foundation, with expertise in research and evaluation in mental health settings. And Dan's currently involved in the Game Change project, which is a VR treatment for psychosis as well. Dan, the question we have for you is related to this. So what kinds of tools and what kinds of evidence do you think research in digital mental health should focus on next?
Thanks, Bryn. That's two questions, isn't it, really? There's what kind of tools and what kind of evidence. So I've jotted a few spider diagrams in front of me for my notes. But in terms of the tools, I think there's not much I can add that hasn't already been said today already through people's presentations. But my thoughts on this were, one of the things you obviously do need is tools which are developed by people who are going to actually use them. And I had some thoughts a few years ago about setting up communities of people, or working with communities of people, people with experience, lived experience or personal expertise of mental health problems, who also were really good at coding. And I think that is something that probably, that's definitely I would like to think probably lead to better solutions and more relevant solutions. Another thing I think that is needed is we need to think about non-exploitative tools. I think it's very easy for these sorts of algorithms and things can be built. You can bring people on board, you can bring service users on board, you can bring people, clinicians on board, the wider public. And then someone goes and sneaks the algorithm out the back door and makes a load of money off it. And I know this stuff can happen, it's not necessarily that common, but I think we need to be aware of it and aware of the potential impact that has on the trust that people have. In terms of the evidence that I think we need, we've heard already about the interface between user testing, UX work and academic research. It's definitely something I would echo, and linking that with patient and public involvement paradigms as well. And another thing I think we need is we need to look at the role of real people in all this. So now I talk from the perspective of Game Change, which is a virtual reality therapy implemented in 5 different sites, and it's just about started now. But it's not like the therapist is inside the virtual reality. The people deliver therapy via the virtual reality program. However, there still needs to be someone, a member of staff needed to go into people's house, to build rapport, to show people how it works, to set it up, etc. And we're calling that person a game changer at the moment. So who and what skills does that person need? You know, you can't do this stuff completely virtually, I don't believe, right now, without losing something. You still need to have a bit of, you know, personal communication. And I think that's something for implementation science to really think about, is about the role of individuals and people in all this.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks very much. Our third panellist today is Lucia Valmaggia from King's College London. So Lucia is a reader in clinical psychology and digital mental health at King's and heads up the virtual reality lab within HR Wellcome, King's clinical research facility there. And our question for you was, what research now needs to be done if virtual reality is going to become a major part of the management of psychosis?
Thank you very much also for the invitation to be here. I think it's good to realize that virtual reality, when we talk about virtual reality applied to psychosis, there have been studies in the mechanisms that trigger the onset of maintenance of symptoms. That's been studied quite a lot. There have been some studies on the assessment of symptoms, when symptoms occur, and there have been very few studies about the effectiveness of using it as a clinical intervention. So the first point to make really is that the evidence base is very much in the early days and is still growing. And we do not really know, coming back to the point Mark here was making earlier, what works for whom and how to deliver it to whom. So should it be a therapist in a digital world? Should it be led by machine learning, that the machine learns how you apply? Or is it better to have a virtual reality assisted therapy where you use it alongside a therapist or a game changer? We do not know any of that. How is it better to interact with the virtual reality? Is it better to interact by having you steering the consultation or what's happening? Or is it better if a therapist chooses for you what the next scene is? There are questions that are still very much open. One other thing that we need to acknowledge, and has been pointed out a few times, is that a lot of the people who deliver services at the moment and care are digital immigrants. So those are people who have been born before 1995. So they are digital immigrants, they're not digital native. I didn't make that terminology up, it actually exists. And it's easy to just say, well, you should adapt it or you should use it. But unless we look at the barrier and what makes it difficult for people to use and why they don't feel confident in using, we will never overcome that barrier unless we really take that point serious. And again, it could be that they feel less confident in using it, but it could also be that they feel that if something goes wrong, they don't know how to intervene and make things right again. So training staff is a big issue. And the other thing, which is my last point, because it's my 2 minutes up, is that we need to look at new ways of evaluating what we're doing. So using the traditional randomized control trial for digital technologies that change all the time makes very little sense, because by the time you've finished your evaluation, the technology is ancient. So we need different ways of evaluating, much more flexible and much more responsive to the reality of digital technologies.
Thank you. And lastly, back to Mark Brown. So Mark, just following on from your talk, the question really was, what do you most want to see researched and by whom in the next 5 years on digital mental health?
Not to put me on the spot or anything, speaking to the entire world of researchers, I'm really firmly convinced that developing really strong taxonomies and classifications to understand what digital tools actually are doing is one of the most pressing things we could possibly do. Because otherwise what we're doing is just doing the equivalent of going to Madagascar and just pointing at a load of completely variant species and calling them different names and saying they're not related to anything. So we look at each new app as if it was an entirely unique event that doesn't have any relationship to any other forms of previous app. When really what we're looking at is people developing things based on design languages, on implementation templates, on weird hunches, fashions, political ideas, what some knob with a robot car says. So I think that job of actually working out a very, very strong way of looking at an app and by eye, first of all knowing exactly what it does and how that, but by what degree that's different from another one is really important. But then also being able to get under the bonnet and look at how it works, what happens. So I'm always thinking you could have a digital phenotype, but for apps. You can see which apps are related to which ones, because without that, every single new app just becomes like hoofing a football in the pitch dark downfield and hoping it goes in the goal. Like, we treat like digital technology because it's the future, we treat it as if it doesn't have a past. We treat digital apps as if they don't have parents and children, and it's rubbish. So that's my answer to that.
Thank you all of you. That's fantastic. I guess what I've picked up from that is that there's so much we need to do. We need to do some more theoretical work to work out what it is we're evaluating. We've got quite a lot of ambivalence and uncertainty about how best to do those evaluations and whether our traditional paradigms and trials can work. And then there are huge questions about implementation and how you actually get this stuff happening. And the challenge with digital tools is the ground shifting under our feet, isn't it? While we think about these things, life is moving on. So counterbalancing all those kind of daunting challenges against the exciting sort of opportunities really for doing new things that can be really helpful is our kind of challenge really. You've absorbed and heard a lot there, so what do you think really? Please do address any questions you've got for the panel. If you've got reflections, those are fine too, but please can we keep them brief so that we can kind of get a few questions in before lunch. To the floor.
Going from basic wireframes for the application to a working beta model that was launched within the cluster for the RCT. How did you test the interface? So how did you know the users would be able to navigate around that? Because obviously there's difficulty with the cluster RCT, recruitment. So how did you test that out with a sample? Or did you just yourselves within the project, decide how to navigate through?
Okay. Thank you. So just to understand the question, was about the interface that we developed for Empower. How did we test that before the randomized control trial? So we used, following on from Mark, actually, so Empower used a pre-existing technology called ClinTouch. There was already work done on ClinTouch in terms of use of ClinTouch by people using services, but also how ClinTouch had interfaced with mental health services if you just send data on a daily basis to clinicians. So there was some experience of clinicians experiencing that as problematic, having alerts arriving in their inbox every day. So we brought in touch as a pre-existing technology, so we were building from that, and we took that then to our consultation and said that this is the system that we have in terms of being able to kind of monitor. How would you see this being implemented? What would you see as the barriers and facilitators? And I think a key feedback that we had from mental health staff was around the data being meaningful, and for that reason our clinical interface was important in the role of our mental health nurse in terms of triaging and making sense of those changes. And we thought that would then facilitate implementation of that into routine care. That in itself, I think, was quite a problematic thing to try and do, so I could talk about that. And then the other side of that for service users, for them, they raised in that consultation phase, early warning signs for them were linked not so much to fears of relapse, but fears of help seeking and the consequences of sharing their experiences. So for that reason, we built in the peer support. So actually a lot of the human elements around the intervention were what we added to a kind of pre-existing technology. The one change, the key change that we made to the technology was to deliver messages. So each time a person used the app, they would get a message, and we spent 5 or 6 months curating a range of messages in a range of formats, from the World Wide Web, and we did that in consultation with a small service user group who helped us think about how those messages could be delivered and what kinds of messages would be thought to be, they felt were useful or not useful. Thank you.
I'm quite preoccupied with, I suppose, this question of flexibility in methods and when it's a good idea to do a trial. I mean, we did the review Maria's talked about, partly because we just wanted to explore whether there were emerging methods being used in digital mental health research that might be more flexible, more parsimonious than trials. And I imagine we need some more trials with some of the really big innovations like virtual reality. But we can't be doing big randomized controlled trials on everything, really. Otherwise it'll take decades before we have any kind of range of sensible tools in place. And with something like the ARIES studies, something like getting people to say what their recovery goals are and being able to track those online, I do wonder whether doing some sort of mega trial is really sensible, or whether we should integrate it with other aspects of self-management and do something more kind of co-produced and flexible. So I suppose that my question is really how can we decide when it's sensible and with what to do a trial, and what other kinds of research might we do to decide whether digital tools are fit for purpose?
I have a really simple answer to that, which will be really frustrating, which is you need to do it when you feel like you need to do it. And that's ultimately the commercial reality for companies creating apps. They will do a big trial when they realise they need a big trial to sell to the kind of customers they need to recoup their investment and make a profit. And it's as simple as that. Researchers and academic conditions are in a really different situation. So the real question is, how do you, as a researcher, as a creator, as a funder, whatever it is, how do you decide when this thing needs to be tested to a level of rigour or a level of scale? I don't see how we get anything beyond that. There isn't just a, well, to be honest, it doesn't require a taxonomy to do so, but there you go.
Yeah, the taxonomy sounds good, but yeah, I guess partly we don't know, so partly we're having today to help us decide when to do trials.
So with regard to virtual reality, we are even a step earlier than because at the moment, every lab develops their own virtual reality environments. They test their own environments, and there's very little sharing, let alone implementation into the real world. So I think a big step will have to be making something that we can share, and then different people, and it's flexible enough to adapt to different cultures and different languages, and because we haven't spoken about that, but today we spoke very much about things that work in our Western world. That doesn't mean they will automatically work in a different reality or a different context. So that's for VR is a very important thing. Can we develop a platform that communicates and that can really be implemented? I know that Game Changer is trying to do that.
Thanks. My observation of trials in the last decade, whether this is accurate or not, is that trials have become a lot more complicated, they've become a lot more multifaceted. It's not just the sort of randomised condition A, condition B, blinded, etc. There are loads of feasibility elements, there are kind of development aspects of it. And I think, from my experience of being involved in Game Change, and I know Cassie Hazel's in the audience as well, who has also been involved in this. There's lots and lots of different parts of before the trial even begins, which are equally important to and provide interesting kind of findings, some of which might actually be more interesting than the results of the final trial themselves. So building the therapy or building the environments is, was a big part of Game Change.
I've seen at least.
I was just going to, I think the problem of methodologies is a really important one to raise. In our feasibility study, we had the freedom to develop the intervention as we went along, as we learned, which is where peer support became a much bigger aspect of that study. I think in large-scale trials, we need to build in the opportunity to update digital. So, for example, Sandra Gucci's ActAssist trial have planned updates to the digital technology that you can then track developments, and you can allow that digital technology to unfold over time. There's then also another question, I think, about how much is that digital intervention sort of mediated by sort of human face-to-face interventions, or how much is that a kind of digital standalone intervention? Because I think those digital standalone interventions, there are then other methodologies like what was mentioned, micro-randomized controlled trials or multi-phase optimization strategies that those digital interventions lend themselves to that are an alternative to randomized controlled trials. So there's something about making sure that the methodology is fitting what the technology is and how that technology is implemented.
People want questions. I got you are first. Do you want to go for it?
Thank you. Mark touched upon the wide range of disciplines that are, have an impact or involved in digital mental health beyond the obvious. So I just wondered whether the panel could speak to either experience of or how we might engage with a wider range of academic disciplines beyond sort of clinicians and software developers. So I'm thinking of social scientists, ethicists, philosophers, and how we might build a sort of ethics layer, if you like, into research around technology, particularly thinking about issues such as unintended consequences.
Thank you. Lucia's handed me the microphone, so even if I didn't have anything to say, I shall think of something. One thing that immediately strikes me is that there's a lot, in academia, there's a lot of funding going into sort of big networks and consortia and that sort of stuff. So you've got the UKRI networks, which some people in the room will be familiar with, the UK PRP, Primary Research Prevention Partnership, I think, is also putting out consortia, and I've noticed there's a real trend about getting people from various disciplines together, like geography, art, engineering, etc., way beyond sort of health sciences. And I just think these are good places to sort of explore those sorts of things from a strategic point of view. In terms of the other aspect of your question, I'm sure that differ.
I can tell you in our experience, when the virtual reality developer became part of the lab, that has really increased the efficiency of what we're delivering and how we deliver things. So his view from a much more computer scientist point of view, what works and what doesn't work in delivering a virtual reality environment has been invaluable to us. So it's coming from a completely different angle. And the other often are not seen as experts, but probably the best experts to work with are the people who have lived experience themselves, so they can tell you what works and what doesn't work for them. And important there is to try to be as wide as possible in catching that, so that your net is wide, that you don't always go for the super service user, as sometimes they are called, but that you also try to access those who would not engage normally. And why not?
It's a really good question. So the really striking thing about our observations in Empower was just the very, very wide variation in people's use of the Empower app, from not wanting it to be installed to some people using it every day for up to a year. And even when you look at those individuals who used it every day for up to a year, those individuals are very different and have very different reasons for use. So an important part of our study is really been having a kind of ethnographic, closer, fine-grained understanding of the reasons for people's use. And part of that was driven by our desire to understand just how people interact with this intervention and what that interaction tells us about the nature of that intervention and its shape and its form and how it unfolds. So there's certainly a role for ethnographers and ethnographic research, but also if we extend what we do in terms of broader sets of relationships, then there's important roles for other disciplines, geographers, for instance, in terms of telling us about the context of mental health and the context of digital for people's use of digital in their environment. So I haven't answered the question about ethicists, but the adverse events brings that out really strongly.
Let's try and fit two more before lunch. Wait for a question now, please.
Hi. Mark actually, or a couple of people have mentioned taxonomies. I just wondered if the panel had any thoughts about the behavioural change taxonomy that exists at UCL, because most of the interventions we've heard about so far really only touch on the 16 taxonomies in that as ways in which people might change their behaviour. And really, we've only heard about feedback and monitoring and goals and planning. Those are the kind of seem to be the most popular ones. But there's lots of other ways in which people can change their behaviour. So I don't know if that's kind of another way to approach it, is to look at lots of the other ways in which behaviour can be changed in terms of digital applications.
Right, I'm going to sally forth having no knowledge at all about this particular question, so we'll see where we get up. That is my privilege as a dickhead white male. So, I don't know, like, with behaviour change stuff, I think there are taxonomies of how you can change people's behaviour. The real question for us in mental health is who is allowed to deploy those mechanisms, and do they have the consent of the people for whom they're being, the people that are being deployed at? Because hitting people around the head with a shovel is pretty good at eliciting behaviour change if you want them to lie down, but it's not so good for other kinds of behaviour change. So I kind of think there's ways of classifying anything, and I think you get very, very interesting possible ideas for the future where you can cross-pollinate different groups of classification. So behaviour change, a particular classification of behaviour change plus a particular classification of digital app does that present us with anything to be explored or not? So I think like individual taxonomies on their own like that are useful for assessing and dividing things up. The question is how you bring those divisions back into the process of putting stuff into action. Like I said, I know nothing about this, but I had a brave start, probably clamor to sleep.
I don't know if this will answer the question, but I think that's what I was thinking about in relation to program theory and having a very good theory about what is the problem that you're trying to address, and whose problem is it? What are the outcomes and the outputs that you're trying to achieve, and what do you theorize to be the mechanisms of change in that? And I think game change is a good example of a digital technology or VR technology that has a kind of clear theory or program theory about that, in that in game change, in the virtual reality context, you have an opportunity for people who are experiencing paranoia to experiment and enter into situations where safety behaviours or defensive behaviours can prevent disconfirmation of paranoid beliefs. And so the VR and game change has been very much designed to tackle those particular mechanisms. And it's hard to imagine how you could tackle the mechanisms in such a vivid, immersive way using another form of technology. So for me, the technology's got to be the tool that addresses the kind of the theory of change and the theory of behaviour change that's being targeted in the intervention, if that makes sense.
We've got a couple of minutes left. I see Andre's been itching to get in. It's the last question before lunch, I think. Go for it.
Yeah, it's picking up Mark's point about inequity. We had a tweet 5 minutes ago from Mad and Unrecovered G, who said, I recently got excluded from a virtual reality study because of my borderline personality disorders label. So it's great that the two studies presented this morning about people with psychosis, and it's great that Game Change has been funded, and that's a big new RCT about psychosis, but it strikes me that there is a massive disconnect still between what we're researching and what we're developing and the people that really need it. So how can we work more to kind of reduce that inequity?
I think it was addressed to you.
Andre was just looking me deep in the eye romantically as he was speaking.
I think it, in part, answer to the question. I think some of that goes back to the previous question around RCTs, randomised control trials, and kind of they are inherently, they have these kind of inequalities built into them because of the way you have to fit certain criteria in order to pass the test, if you like, in order to get into the RCT. And these are preset inclusion and exclusion criteria that kind of underpins clinical trials. So I think there is an inherent inequality when it comes to taking part in clinical trials, which is, I suppose, a philosophical problem, really, going back to Sonia's question about, when do we actually use clinical trials, for this sort of thing. I mean, and I am aware, with Game Change, it can be pretty disappointing when, there's something which is happening in your local area, whether that's Manchester or Nottingham or Newcastle, wherever it is, some of the sites are Game Change, but you can't get access to a particular therapy because you don't meet a certain sort of criteria or threshold, and I can imagine that must be immensely frustrating. I think I don't have a good answer to that. I think, that goes back to clinical trial design. But I think one of the things around these big clinical trials is they are, hopefully, they have the long-term aim of getting these things into clinical care more widely. So you start with a small sort of controlled, population, if you like, for want of a better word. And then, if it works there, then there are wider implications. But yes, I can imagine that's very frustrating from the short-term perspective, right now.
I was just going to say, in my little talk there, I was talking about the idea of external pressure, like external pressure for change there's one lone voice trying to exert some external pressure for change. So if we're thinking about how we make things and build things that really matter to people, by definition, very often those people aren't us. So I think we need to look at the way in which academia particularly can support the coming together of those lone voices of external pressure, those people who really do want this tech stuff, the people who do want this stuff to change mental health, but who are not rich tech pros, not academics, and not doctors coding in their sheds writing mood tracking apps. They're a very different group of people, and we are not servicing those people, we're not paying attention to those people, and ultimately we look to them as trial participants rather than human beings. And that troubles me. I think that's where we need to make some investment of time and space and money.
I also think there's a challenge to research funders. Often trials are funded on the basis of including and excluding people on the basis of diagnosis. And I don't think that necessarily has to be the same in the future, and I don't think it's necessarily what's happening in all trials now. So research could be funded on the basis of particular outcomes, so it could be funded on the basis of can we reduce involuntary admissions, which is a range there's a range of stakeholders with a range of diagnostic labels attached to that. Can we fund trials that aim to reduce social avoidance? Can we fund trials that aim to reduce loneliness, to increase social networks? These are outcomes that are not diagnostically specific, so I think there is a challenge to research funders, but also to academics to think about who our trials being designed for, and thinking more carefully about the end users of the healthcare technologies, ensuring that they are treated as full stakeholders in those trials and those interventions, and that goes from conception of the trial in terms of the outcomes and who's involved and who's eligible for those trials, but also determination of outcomes, measurement of those outcomes, thinking about their role in the intervention itself. So there is I think a real challenge for us to think about user experience being much more at the centre of trial design, and trial funders thinking much more about inclusive designs.
It's also at the moment when we're doing trials, so we're so focused on this thing that we think is real, which doesn't exist really, which is a diagnosis. Just we have created it to make our life easy, but it doesn't really exist. But anyway, that's a different discussion. But the other thing that also makes it difficult to people to engage in trials is that often when we want to do a trial, everything has to first be approved by, and we saw that, for example, in other studies as well, like Andy study, the clinical coordinator or the doctor or the psychologist has to say, I think this person is suitable for my trial. Why? Why can the person themselves not be empowered enough to say, I want to take part in this trial? Why should the clinician, it doesn't happen in other fields of medicine. It's very interesting that we have this paternalistic view of people with mental health problems, that they would be unable to decide themselves whether they want to do or want to take part. And I think the power of digital is that it's bypassing that in many ways, because people can just download this on the phone if they want. I think that's a very big change as well.
Thank you. We'd better wrap up there. The next item on the agenda is lunch, which is at the back and will be great. So another chance to talk informally now. We also have more group discussions from another panel this afternoon, so plenty of time to carry on these conversations.